right, so we'll start with some brief introductions. Start with myself. I'm Gordon Adelsberg. I'm the CEO of Communication for Geeks. But let's get right to our panel here. Joe Cleaver from Microsoft.
That's me.
Say a quick word.
Sure. So I'm Joe from Microsoft. I spent I've been in Microsoft for about 10 years. Prior to that, I was on Wall Street for 10 or 15 years. Managed a bunch of offshore projects and offshore teams back when there were these large-scale boil the ocean types of projects. It's been a few years since I've done those, but and now I'm in more of an evangelism role at Microsoft. So all the good stuff: Windows 8, Windows Phone, Azure, those types of things.
A former colleague and a boss who kept me out of a lot of trouble, kept me out of a lot of jams back in the day. Andrew Parlock from Battelle.
We'll tell at least one of those stories. So Andrew Parlock, grew up as an aerospace engineer. Earliest part of my career, I was grabbed by the scruff of the neck and brought international by a great group of sales guys that needed somebody that would solve their problems and listen to them somewhat. So I had a real early baptism in my early 20s to an international role. Since then, I grew up, did some growing up at Anderson Consulting, DuPont, where I brought talk about evangelizing, brought kind of all the best that is DuPont to a group of international clients. But for about the past 8 years, I've been in the U.S. intelligence area within cybersecurity specifically, and right now responsible for Battelle Memorial's commercial cyber practice.
And Mike Sadowski from a company called Cayugasoft, kind of like Cayuga's Waters.
That's right. So Cayugasoft Technologies is my firm. We're an offshore software development firm. We're about 30 people, and I'll tell you a little bit more about what we do probably in some of the questions later. My background, though, prior to that, I've been involved with venture-backed companies in the New York area, mainly in the area of logistics technology. So I was VP of product for a venture-backed logistics software company here in the city for several years, and then became CIO of a venture-backed logistics company in Connecticut called Odyssey Logistics. So I was there for many years, I think about 9 years, and now I do this.
Okay, so what we want to get through tonight, we want to give you a better perspective of the challenges you're going to face when you have offshore teams. Whether we like it or not, it's a reality, it's here to stay. So we're going to discuss some best practices and some colossal failures, and what to look for when you're faced this situation. So let's do some audience participation first. Whoever's been in some sort of a cross-functional team, say hooray. Let's hear cheers. Hooray. Hooray. Okay, everybody who hasn't, let me hear you boo. Okay, we have one. Next, what about cross-border and cross-ocean? How many people? Let me hear you cheer. Hooray. A little applause, a little energy. Okay, good. So throughout, if you have a question, raise your hand. We're going to make this very interactive. Hear from our panelists. I've got a list of questions, a list of topics, but have at it too. So let's get started with Mike. First question. We've all heard of software development going to India, Eastern Europe. Where's the next big region? Where are things flowing, and why do you think that is?
I'm going to place my bet on South America, and we actually recently opened a small center. I hope it'll become a big center in Chile. And the reason we chose Chile was actually as kind of a counterpoint to Eastern Europe, where we do our other work. Number one, there are some pretty stable countries in South America, so Chile happens to be one of them. You'll pay a bit of a price premium relative to India and to Eastern Europe, but what I'm hoping and finding is that there's some benefits. There are some benefits, namely same time zone. So to your interest probably about communication, in Chile the time zone is right now it's slightly ahead of U.S. Eastern time zone, but during parts of the year it's in the exact same time zone as the Eastern U.S. coast. So I believe through the similar time zone and also through similar culture. It's a Latin culture. It's not the same as us Northeasterners here in the U.S. exactly, but I think it's a compatible culture for doing offshore software development. especially with my market, which tends to be smaller venture-backed companies.
And speaking of where the markets are going, Andrew, you and I were talking about what's going on in Europe. Can you comment on you said there were some trust issues.
Yeah, actually, Gordon, if I could, I agree completely on the whole South American piece. I'm spending a lot of time right now in the financial services market within cybersecurity, and we kind of see South America as a real underserved market. It's been traditionally this, how shall I say, maybe not conforming to the same standards of business that we've always done, but they're rapidly trying to come up to that level. So South America seems to be a really interesting place, and I'm going to be taking some of our products down there real quickly. But I just came back from London not more than 8 days ago, and we were there talking about cybersecurity, and I was introduced to a phrase there that I wasn't used to, and they said, well, in this post-Snowden, I said, post-Snowden. So that was interesting to me, because we're dealing with cybersecurity, and cybersecurity, if you're going to bring a vendor on to do cybersecurity, it's all about trust, right? And right now, perhaps Snowden has given that trust a black eye to the entire U.S., and here we are, a U.S.-based firm. So the questions they wanted to know is, can you manage? We have a very unique product. Can you manage this effort out of the UK? And well, just so happens we do have a UK office. So yeah, the answer is yes. And that was a big deal, even if we're managing it with US-based or American-based employees, but just to be there locally, to understand the local sentiment, to understand the local news, if you will. That's important. And we hear that over and over again. I'm working with a Dutch company, same kind of thing. Are you going to be able to manage this out of Central Europe or out of Western Europe? So there's that concept of people still want, to know that you're going to manage it with a European mentality or a sentiment, if you would, or a South American, or as the case may be.
Have you seen something similar with Microsoft in your clients?
Not in the case of offshore development per se. What I want to go back to the South American thing because that was actually recently crossed my radar. In my group now, as I said in my intro, I don't deal with really large enterprise scale projects anymore, but we do a lot of the smaller app development, which is what a lot of people do. And we're starting to find a lot of what we call SIs or system integrators, so design and development shops that are popping up in South America. So it's really interesting, the dynamic. So, because we can, we have SIs in our ecosystem, there's partners all over the world that do what people right here in New York do, but again, it's much more cost favorable and it really comes down to the quality of work. And so we're not seeing a lot of challenges with that, especially because of the time zone thing. And it all goes back to how you manage the project itself. In terms of the European thing, Microsoft, all the big tech companies always have trust issues. And so, that's a whole separate conversation around the cloud and how we manage versus some of our competitors. Cybersecurity, it all sort of, I think that's a whole separate can of worms to get into.
No doubt.
Okay. Now, in the title of this presentation, we said best practices and colossal failures. So I'm going to let you guys pick whoever wants to go first. Let's talk about a colossal failure we had from communications with the overseas team. So who's got one they're dying to share?
So we had, I was at Morgan Stanley actually, and we were sort of like an internet startup right before the bubble burst back in the early 2000s, I guess. And we started dabbling with offshore development. So we looked at India, we looked at South Africa, and we decided to do a project, a pilot in China. And China was very, very new to that space back then. And one of the biggest issues, and so the CEO of the company came over to New York and we met with them, and it was basically a survey generator. So it was before SurveyMonkey and all these online services really existed, and we needed one internally. And so we gave them the project, and it was an unmitigated disaster. They did their best, but it was a requirements thing. It was how you wrote up, the interpretation of requirements, your interpretation of tests, all that kind of stuff that goes to offshore communication in general. And we ended up just rewriting it ourselves. It was like what we should have done in the first place, but we gave it a chance. We gave it a shot. So we went headlong into that dark night, and it didn't go well.
And I repeated that mistake with my first website for my new company. Complete disaster, because everything you said, I did those same mistakes. You'd think we learned from the past. How about you two?
Gordon tipped me on to the huge disaster. And actually, I'm glad I can the biggest disaster I've seen, I'm glad I can point the finger at somebody else.
The project that Gordon managed.
Yeah, exactly. It was the project that Gordon managed. There's a great quote from Up in the Air by George Clooney. It said, "I stereotype because it's faster," right? And well, guess what? So does everybody else, right? So we stereotype every international country. We stereotype them all, and they all stereotype us. And as an example of that, if you ever have a colleague that you're close enough to and you're out maybe having a cocktail, ask them to do their best impression of an American. It will crack you up. The stereotypes that come out in that 1-minute monologue. But I had a team we were trying to manage. We were taking a technology from a high-tech company in Germany and trying to bring that to the American market. And I had my own failures that were great and many throughout this, but my manager just couldn't get through his head that even though we're taking the technology and we're pushing the technology in the US, the tech team is based in Europe. And we need to be aware of that. And we need to have certain sentiments and manage their stereotype of we all know the stereotype of Americans. Loud, obnoxious, overconfident, American stereotype in Germany, in Europe in general. And it was horrible. I just couldn't get it through this guy's head. I just couldn't get through his head. And so I called it it's the octopus falling out of an infinitely tall tree. It just kept happening over and over and over again. These horrible communication letdowns and failures, to the point where I was kept on as the tech lead, and he was moved on to another part of the company. And that was really interesting to me. So for me, it was a success in one aspect. I was still a relatively young engineer program manager, so I didn't certainly move into that director level position, but a new director came in. But it's something we need to be aware of, these sentiments that other folks have about us and how we present ourselves in an international posture to work with those teams effectively.
So what do you call someone who speaks 2 languages? Bilingual? Someone who speaks multiple languages? Someone who speaks 1 language? American. That's right.
That's exactly right.
I'm sure most of you have heard that one. Okay, how about a best practice from someone who runs a shop in Chile and Ukraine, right?
Yeah.
Also Russia?
Yeah, and we have a small team in Russia too. Yeah, I understand you've had a lot of discussions around agile development here in the past few meetings, and so sorry if I'm going to be boring by bringing it up, but I think at least in my client base, which again are smaller venture cap companies, they're cost sensitive, that's why they're doing offshore development. I think agile processes have actually been revolutionary in terms of actually getting offshore development to work. Why? Because I think they put in place roles for communication and management that are well understood, and you can show them to folks offshore. They understand their role, and by using some of the tools that are available now, so we use a lot of Jira or related tools for managing a backlog of requirements and really for project management. So we don't use Microsoft Project, we use Jira, we use a little bit of Basecamp, these very basic tools, these kinds of stand-up meetings. And people ask me, well, how do you do these offshore? Stand-up meetings, aren't they meant to be done in person? Yeah, if you read the original book, it talked a lot about co-location, and yes, we want co-location, but in the real world that I'm living in, where we're going to be offshore, and the customers I have to be offshore for what they're going to do, we have to make it work offshore. So we use Skype, and we do the same thing. So I think these using these tools, these simple tools that are available now, like Jira, Basecamp, Skype, defining these agile roles, really making people offshore live them, and also making the onshore people live them too. If you're going to be the product owner, you gotta do that stand up and that weekly demo with your offshore team. There's no bullshit about you didn't have time this week. You have to do it. It's not going to work unless you do it. So we really, try to bring those agile processes to life, and I think it works.
Gordon, you and I actually talked about this, and I think it comes down to maturity. No one knows how much maturity you need in an organization until you start dealing with this type of thing, right? And so, the customer has to be on the calls, or the onshore person has to be on the calls, and it's easy to say, we'll do it next week, and it's like, no, you don't realize how immature your organization is until you actually try to execute one of these projects in one way or another. And then you really understand what it's, you have to have discipline, make sure everybody's on the same page, make sure everybody's actually speaking the same language in terms of what is expected coming out of that next run.
Yeah, and I'm working on right now a US-based project in one of our projects. And that there's still all kinds of miscommunication and misunderstandings of what everything means. So that it's not even an offshore only phenomenon. I'm finding today people are using the same words to mean different things and not understanding each other. So it's normal. You can't manage by remote control your offshore team. You have to get in there and roll up your sleeves and live that agile process.
Yeah, I come at it from a little bit of a softer side because I'm more business development focused right now. But managing that international team, do your homework. We all come on. There's some real basic things that we all know. Right? Do your homework. Understand a little bit about the culture. There's a lot of research out there. Understand their culture. Know how to say a couple words in the native tongue. Right? Know these things. Show your face. Be there. Be present. Make the sacrifice. It is recognized by a European firm or South American firm that, yes, of course, we're going to do a lot of this via conference call. We're going to do a lot of this via, email and so on and so forth. But to get on a plane and be there and be present, that sacrifice, the willingness to do that, is a really a big, I think, a fantastic best practice. And when you're there, it's all improv comedy, right? It's all. So you have to practice really, really hard to do good improv, right? That's the contradiction in terms. The little things matter. Understand. I did an awful lot of work in Germany. When you give your first presentation in Germany to a directorship or whatnot, it's all about process. You better follow. Right. This I'm going right down the stereotype of Germans, but bear with me here. You better follow the exact process. You better use the template. You better use the exact font. Everything better. And I had a colossal failure on as a young engineer doing this. The funny thing is about the Germans is once you build a level of trust, the document, the PowerPoint becomes a checkbox, and all the work gets done after the box has been checked. And it almost comes, well, did you do your PowerPoint? Did it follow the standards? Okay, good. We can push that to the side and let's have an actual conversation about the business that needs to get done. So it's funny how the pendulum completely swings the opposite direction once you've met a certain standard. Now, if you never meet that standard, you're going to be stuck in process all the time, and you'll never get to relationship. You'll never get to the real communication, and you'll have a very difficult time. Just one example in Germany.
Yeah, I think to your point, business travel. I mean, if you're going to manage an offshore team and think you're never going to go there, I mean, think of the colossal failures I can think of. It's that. You hire this team, you got 10 people working offshore, you never go and see them. You're putting the thing at risk, and really you wouldn't be willing to spend like $3,000-4,000 on a business trip. You really need to build that into the budget and assume you're going to do some travel.
So being an absentee landlord doesn't always work.
I don't think so.
Okay. While we're talking about Europe, I was having a chat with my partner in my Communication for Geeks. He said when he dealt with a French boss, it's very different. Americans want, here's the answer, here's some supporting documentation. But the French are very, very different, where you've got to give the whole story step by step by step by step, and you walk through the whole process and everything you've done, and then you get to the conclusion. Have you seen this? Have you been exposed to this?
In a French company, yeah. And be prepared to be interrupted along the entire way. Again, I generalize, right? It's faster. Presenting to a very large company in Paris multiple times. You have to tell the story. You have to be prepared to get interrupted over and over and over and over again. And it's not a rudeness thing. It is an engagement thing. If you're not being interrupted while you're presenting in France, you've lost the audience. Like right now, if we were in France, I would get up and walk out. Like you're not interrupting me at all.
And I wrote in my notes, what do you do? How do you keep from going crazy?
Yeah, the Jap, if we worked with the Japanese will stay engaged. There's a lot of ahas, there's a lot of head nodding. If I had this amount of head nodding and ahas in an American audience, I would just reach into my bag and grab the contract. It means nothing in Japan. It means nothing, that's just politeness. They're head nodding and they're saying aha because they're just being polite. It has nothing to do with you closing the deal. You think you're closing the deal. You're walking out of there high-fiving. But you need to understand that. You need to understand that culture.
Another thing I found in Asia. Oh, good. Question.
To that point, how do you, when you speak multiple languages, there's this idea of code switching, of changing mindsets to flip from one language to another. Do you have at this point, you probably do it subconsciously when you land, but how do you develop that code switching when you move from one culture to another?
Well, it's easier for me because I'm a true American in the fact that I speak about 6 broken languages, but none more than like where's the toilet?
I'm not talking about the language so much as the cultural things that you mentioned.
Yeah, it is. It's like going. I treat everything like a sport analogy. I really do. I'm not here in Japan for fun. I'm here to make this happen. I'm not going into this meeting because it's the most enjoyable thing in the world. I'm there for a purpose. So do your homework. What is it that you're there to accomplish? Set your goals. Have your good call plan. I'm off communication now and just in good old business planning and meeting planning. But have your plan in going into a meeting with international clients and international customers or an international team is even more important because of that, because you could switch yourself. So you have to remind yourself. You have to remind yourself that 6 people out of 12 shaking their head, nodding, is not an affirmation of your presentation, but rather a level of engagement and politeness from the audience. So yeah, it really comes down to planning and being in the game.
Question.
I hope I answered that properly. No?
I've never heard anybody really talk about it so
Yeah.
openly.
Yeah.
So I don't know yet.
Yeah, for me, specific. I don't want to dominate the conversation. I apologize. I'll give you an example with a group of Chinese executives that came from an oil field in China to visit us at DuPont. Actually, when Gordon and I worked together, it was an awful lot of preparation that went into it. An awful lot for really not a lot of meeting time, but an awful lot of preparation. One of the things I did was they had brought their interpreter, so we didn't need an interpreter, right? Because they had one. No. That sends the wrong message. It sends the message that you haven't done your homework. It sends the message that you're not willing to spend the $4,000 or $5,000. Luckily for us, we had a native Chinese Mandarin speaker in our accounting department. Luckily, her husband was kind enough to let her have multiple dinners with me and this 12 folks from the oil company in China. But that was one of the things that I did, went above and beyond, that showed them we care, and also helped me culturally, to your point. There was at least 2 or 3 times during that 3-day of meetings and dinners that I would have completely gone off the rails. I would have slipped back into American mode. I would have just said, we're ready to close this deal. Let's get it done. And having this woman with me kept me almost like a process coach, if you will. And it also didn't hurt that I had an interpreter.
We've got 2 questions back here.
I apologize. Somebody else
Go ahead.
answer.
I couldn't agree with you more. I used to deal with Swiss bankers, and they have a dialect of German called Schweizerdeutsch, and it's unlike any German. Germans don't understand it. And it's not just a courtesy of showing that you've done your homework. you're going to get better information when you have your own interpreter, because there were times we had conversations and then all of a sudden they broke off in Schweizerdeutsch. They'd be talking half an hour and then we ask them what you say and they give us a 2-line response.
Mhm.
So obviously we're not getting the whole story.
Exactly.
So it makes sense from a business point of view, not just from a courtesy.
We have a
Yeah,
question.
I wanted to get back to the head nodding. My experience has been in the past in dealing with folks from India and that area, that especially when you're trying to get them to understand the process or what the product is supposed to do if they're developers or something like that, and you're going through functional requirements or business requirements or technical requirements or whatever, you get a lot of head nodding, but not necessarily that they understand anything you're talking about.
Exactly.
And that has proved on a number of projects I was on when I was consulting to be a big problem in the companies I was at, because the work didn't get done anywhere near what was expected because there was a total gap there.
And if we don't do our homework, it's all about getting your homework done.
There was that lack of knowledge of the difference in the culture and just be polite, the same concept.
This is on the subject of head nodding. I have to conclude that depending on which part of India, which province you come from, agreement is indicated by shaking of the head rather than.
Sure.
Have you seen that?
I haven't had the opportunity to work with a culture of that, but it doesn't surprise me. But that information's out there. If you do your homework, I promise you that information's out there
Right.
somewhere. The omnipotent Google will have that information.
Or Bing.
Yeah, or Bing. Yeah, the omnipotent Bing. Excuse me.
Okay. Move to a slightly different topic. We were talking about your folks in Ukraine were posting everything on Facebook.
Right.
So this may sound goofy, but how does the social media affect your development teams?
Well, I guess I don't know if it's affecting the teams, but I have really 2 main social media avenues. One is LinkedIn, so that's a bit more buttoned up and straight-laced, just what I want sent out, all right, we did this project for this customer, isn't this interesting? But then on Facebook, I pretty much let the staff do what they want. So they post pictures of their parties. So they have a lot of parties over there for some reason. I don't know. They had so if you look at our Facebook page, they had a number of them got dressed up for Halloween, and it was gangster night was the theme, so they're kind of wearing, gangster uniform. And, so we just think it's, I don't try and control the Facebook page. I just let that be fun. If they posted something inappropriate, I guess I'd take it down. It hasn't been a problem. But to me, that's just their outlet for showing the personality of the firm and that it's a fun place to work. So I kind of like the way they own that, and I own the LinkedIn.
I can't speak for. We actually had a customer that engaged an offshore development company with an onshore presence, and a designer had left the company. They were asked to leave the company, and the designer took their designs as part of this company's upcoming launch product and posted it, as part of her portfolio. And so you always have those types of issues that you have to watch out for. That and posting like test videos, as part of this thing, not realizing that it's in the public domain. And so of course the customer gets very upset about it and then starts to cease and desist, and then there could be a lawsuit. I mean, so I think you have to control it very, very quickly, or else it can spin out of control very, very quickly. So obviously they were taken down immediately, but going after that designer that was on her own, that was more of a threat type of thing. You're now in the freelance world, you're not going to be able to stand up to this law firm coming after you to take down these designs, no matter how honest they are.
One versus Microsoft, I don't think you stand much.
Yeah, we had nothing to do with it actually. So I was on the outside looking in. It was for Windows 8, but we were not going to take that was an issue between the customer and the integrator at that point.
Okay. Any other questions from the audience on this subject? Go ahead.
I kind of want to step back a little bit and talk about when does it make sense to offshore? You have a project, you have a client, you have something to be done. I think the rules about when does that make sense, when do you do it, when do you not do it, what are the pros and cons, I think those decision-making considerations have changed and evolved over the years. I'd just like to get a comment on where we think that is now.
I'll give you my perspective. I think it seems to come and go with fashion, frankly. And several years ago, I think larger firms were interested in cutting costs, so they would move everything offshore and try to get a big step change in cost. But again, the clients I work with, they tend to be more venture-backed companies or medium-sized logistics firms is another area we're strong because of my background in that industry. And those firms, they're of two minds. I find the startups mostly would like to create their core product in the US these days with a small team, and that's, you read the lean startup, you get that feeling that, we need to get back to 3 guys in a garage. And that can work. I think where you want to go offshore is really in a couple of cases from what I'm seeing. You want to get beyond those 3 guys. You want to actually, have a process that scales. You want to actually do real QA because the 3 guys in the garage weren't really testing the product and they don't really want to test it. When you start needing to support multiple platforms, you realize, the 3 hackers built the iOS. Oh, what about Android? Well, we don't know about Android, and actually we don't have enough bandwidth. So that's, I think, what I'm seeing with the venture-backed guys. That's when they start needing to go offshore. So I think it makes sense to really use that core team to create that product vision and pivot if necessary to find your market. I think it does make sure to do that onshore, and then as you need to scale, then go offshore. But we do have a couple clients though who they get say tens of thousands of dollars in funding, not hundreds of thousands, not millions, and they're in an accelerator, and they need to build a product. So we're working with a company in an accelerator, and their first funding from the accelerator was like $25,000. So you can't build a product with Americans for $25,000. Now, if you're a technical founder and maybe you got a buddy, maybe you can do something for free. But he's a business-oriented founder, and he put in some of his own money, so he had tens of thousands. So for him, we built his MVP. And we got it out, and he got more funding. So if you're really cash-strapped and you have very minimal funding, and you're not a technical person, I think you don't have a choice. You have to find a good offshore firm. Yeah.
It's like the 3-legged stool never changes: time, money, and resources. Right. So I know for us, when I was part of the management team that made the decisions of what we were going to offshore, and then I was also a vendor where I was out selling our offshore wares. A lot of it came down to how committed the resources were internally and whether or not they actually had the expertise to get it done, right? So then you have firms coming in, larger firms that come in and they've done a ton of algo trading types of platforms or online banking platforms, and so you have a sort of a concentrated expertise that you can say, yeah, for the cost, and I'm going to deliver it relatively soon, or at least have the false sense of security that I'm going to get it done, so it's not going to be a boil of the ocean. I'll have to deal with a lot of internal politics. Sometimes things like that, it could just be a simple matter of convenience. I agree, though, there was a huge push to get everything offshore years ago when I was doing it. And that's why we looked at South Africa, China, all over the world. All of a sudden, India was too expensive at $35 an hour. And you realize, the infrastructure and everything that's in play there and the maturity that those teams have, that's what you're really paying for in some of those cases. And so, but I don't think those 3 legs ever really change.
Can I, if it's not out of the order, can I try answering that question?
Excuse me?
If it's not out of the order, can I try answering the question for him?
Oh, absolutely.
If you actually don't think of offshoring, but right at the back, think of outsourcing. And if you're going to offshore only for cost reasons, you're going to fail. There are tons of firms out there, tons of countries out there who are doing offshoring right now. Anyone can supply you labor cheaper than the first step. Think of a problem you're trying to solve and think why you can't do it. The problem could be you don't have the technical staff in hand. You want to get flexibility. You need 5 technical staff right now, and a year later you might not need 5, you might just need 1. An offshore or an outsourcing partner can get you 1. You actually can work with an American for $25,000. Though there are options right now. There are things called as rural outsourcing, nearshoring. There are companies working out of places like Nashville, places like Raleigh, North Carolina. where you can get people. You can get fresh graduates out of master's programs out of NJIT in New Jersey who will do work for you at $35 an hour. Offshoring is not something that, okay, my budget got cut in 50%, whatever, let's go offshore. That's that worked 10 years ago, doesn't work anymore. Think of a problem area. It could be a domain. Many offshore firms are actually understand the business of their clients as much as their clients themselves do, because they have spent the time to understand what their clients are. And so if you're trying to, for example, solve a problem for your business and you think that it has to be done within time, done within a budget, and you want somebody else to do it for you, do those kinds of things. That will make you successful. Don't do it only for the price.
Good point.
So I was thinking about your colossal failures list, and it seemed like most of them were a while in the past. I'm going to compliment you and say that's probably experience has something to do with it. You're not repeating your mistakes. But also, can you think about what role do you think that test-driven development and business-driven development disciplines have done to contribute to a better coordination between teams? Have they made a difference, or is it all just hype?
That's certainly not my area of expertise, but just good project management discipline has made a huge difference. But I'll let you guys ask more of the test-driven and business-driven process.
I'm not sure I can speak to that either. I actually love the point about outsourcing versus offshoring. In the case of the China test project, that was a pure offshore. They wanted to break into the business, and it was a failure, right? Where we've seen a lot of success is, the larger players that have been embedded in enterprises for quite some time. They have the expertise. They've done it time and time again, and exactly that. You can burst resources. You can contract them. And the one thing I'll say, sort of as a blanket, is that I've seen both from managing the teams that haven't listened, as well as trying to impart to customer teams to listen, is if you bring in an outsourced partner that's going to do something that's significant for you, and you're going to spend the money, and you're going to offshore, and you're going to do all that, they have a very specific set of requirements a lot of times of how they want to communicate, what the shape the requirements need to be in, and typically the customer will be like, yeah, we know, but we know better than you. And 9 times out of 10, that's a road to disaster as well, because again, it goes to, they understand the processes that work, they understand the frameworks that work, and how to get these projects done on time and on budget. So I can't speak to what you're saying, but I just want to make sure that, offshore, I think we're using offshore and outsourcing interchangeably, but it was a really, really good point.
The CEO of Colossal.
Sorry, you were asking about test-driven development, or
Has test-driven development or business-driven development made a difference in how you interact with your teams?
Test-driven development's not something we've really tried. In terms of business-driven development, I guess the processes I'm most familiar with are lean startup kind of processes. Is that the kind of thing you mean? Because that we certainly do.
Like writing requirements in Cucumber, and then giving the requirements in an executable form to the development team, having them come back with design and execution strategy.
Yeah, we haven't done much of that. Again, I think it may be, our market is people who are trying to figure out their market, So they're trying to figure out what is my product, what is my market. So that's why the lean startup model, I think, really is something they've all seized upon, because, and you all hear them, it's overused now, oh, we might need a pivot, and we're pivoting a lot, but that, there's something to that where, they're trying to do something quickly, see if it succeeds, see if it fails. If it fails, all right, we haven't spent all our money. I mean, the big failure, I think, that I remember in my career was, an early startup I was with. We got 20 million in funding, which wasn't much at the time. This is like in the early 2000s. Now it's a lot actually to get 20 million, but we had 20 million, and we spent it all on mini basketballs and marketing and things like that. And we spent all our money, and we never really figured out what our market was. And now, my observation, I guess it's 15 years later, not a lot of people do it. I mean, people fail, no question. But you don't see a lot of people spend 20 million before they realize they've failed. They spend $1 million and then they realize that wasn't working, and then they spend another $1 million and then they switch gears slightly or adjust course again. So I think that those
burn rate.
Yeah. So those kind of processes are really more what we're doing. That kind of lean startup.
I'm going to comment on one thing, it's not the test-driven development cycle. It's our over-reliance. Again, I'm from the softer side. It's our over-reliance on process in general, especially with these international teams. You can't replace good people skills and relationship skills with good business development process. And we have a tendency to do that, right? I spent a good bit of time with Northrop Grumman, also an Agile company, using Agile in all sorts of ways. And Northrop made, I think, a smart decision that they were really only going to go into the UK market because they're just so much like Americans. And I hope you can understand my facetiousness when I say that. Of course they're going to understand our our Agile development process. And well, goodness, they already do Agile development over there. So that's where we're going to go. And nobody bothered to stop and say, they're nothing like Americans. We barely speak the same language. As a matter of fact, if you talk to a good Brit, he would say we don't speak the same language. So I would first take care of the softer side. I would first get the teams together, make sure people know each other, make sure people know how to pronounce each other's names as they would have them pronounced. My friend Werner is not Werner. It is Werner, right? And Werner cares that his name is pronounced Werner. So regardless of how good my development process is, if I'm saying Werner, all he's going to think about is I can't even pronounce his flipping name. Why do I care about this process? So take care of the foundation before you swing your mighty process sword.
There was a quote, I think it was George S. Patton describing England, 2 nations divided by a common language. You've heard that one. We had a question in the back here.
Well, I want to chime in on what you had said.
Oh, okay.
I come from the perspective of outsourcing, but I see like outsourcing, offshoring. Offshoring is a flavor of outsourcing, probably for a lot of companies. On the executable level, from my experience, like test-driven development, even BDD tech frameworks where you're talking about maybe a more English-like specification level, that's only ever been really beneficial for technical people and for people that are very close to the technical project. So if the customer is not going to have technical expertise, it's going to be very difficult for them to get involved in that in a meaningful way because they're going to look at it all. It's going to be a different language to them entirely. There's that whole nuance of programming that comes with all those frameworks. What I've found extremely valuable is, so test-driven development's on a very small level usually, testing, integration testing within the guts of the system. BDD steps away and tries to grab a bigger piece of it, almost stepping away to like a functional level of how the system should behave. But I think if you almost then step another level up, in a lot of cases what's missing is looking at what are we trying to accomplish. And I imagine with offshoring, at least the experiences I've had working with other people in an outsourcing setting in different countries, having a good understanding of what we want to accomplish can be extremely valuable. If you get on this low level of requirements, when you have misunderstandings there, you'll miss the requirement. And if you miss the requirement may itself miss what's trying to be accomplished. You've got like two degrees of off course as opposed to, sometimes it's hard enough just to talk about what is trying to be accomplished. And if you can understand that, then you can be a little more successful deriving the requirements of using whatever testing framework underneath them. I got excited about those trainers too, because I thought, oh wow, the customer could write the tests, and I could just implement them. But I've seen that even with domestic companies, that they don't understand what you're trying to accomplish when you do that, and it takes them down that path of all we need to talk about is requirements, and I'd rather push them up the path of all we need to talk about is what you're trying to accomplish. But maybe contextual too, maybe the customer as well. If they want to get in the nitty-gritty of that thing, or they have their own development teams as well, then I guess it could be
Okay, more questions from the audience? I have one because I'm interviewing a sales guy coming up. Do you guys have any thoughts about what to look for in video conferencing? It's a little off topic, but we do so much when we do the offshore teams or the teams in other time zones, other areas, in video conferencing. What have you found that works and what doesn't work? And what are some things to watch out for?
I'll tell you a best practice that we started. The worst video conference in the world is when you have one or two people on different video feeds and 5 people in the room. So the 5 people in the room, we have interaction. I can see your facial expressions and I can see the slight head nod, and you're going to kind of give me one of these, and so on and so forth. So a best practice that we've done currently with my team, if we have a video conference, we're all on video conference. Meaning, even if you're in the same office at the same time, we will, and we have 2 people overseas or in another location, we will all be on video conference. So we will all be on our own separate video feed. And it levels the playing field completely. It will change your video conferences. The communication that you gain off of that will be, the efficiency that you gain from those 2 folks or 3 folks that would typically be on the video feed, and their communication level was almost nil, and the efficiency is almost nil. And the group we have in the room, the 3 or 4 we have in the room is relatively good. You'll level the playing field across. It'll take a little bit of practice. Again, practice is everything. But the level of appreciativeness that you'll get from your folks to do it, again, it's that common sacrifice. It's that common, if we're all gonna, if one of us is gonna do it, we're all gonna do it. It's a big deal, and it's a real nice best practice.
Yeah, I happen to agree with you 100%. Another thing that I found with the video conferencing is when you've got people on video conferencing, they're not multitasking as though they were in a regular audio conference.
Exactly.
So literally you can control that.
Mm-hmm.
The other piece too is, as you suggested, if everyone's got their own feed, I've been on both sides of that. I've been in the room with the one video versus being the one person outside. Mm-hmm. There's people that hit the mute button, and then there's all sorts of side conversations
Sure.
in the conference room that everyone else is not privy to share.
Yeah. And everyone knows it. Everyone knows it. So get rid of it.
Yeah, well, I guess related questions both about video conferencing and audio conferencing, okay? Because in the company I'm at, for the most part, they're audio conferences. So it's also a combination of some of us at a desk or at a home or wherever we happen to be working that day, and other people in an office. So they've got the Polycom that you can hear maybe the person near the Polycom,
Yep.
but you can't hear the people elsewhere, and I'm sure that also happens in video conferences. So any thoughts or comments about audio only versus video and all of the other dynamics that are considered to that?
I just talk about maybe what tools we're using. Skype is still big, and Skype is better than it used to be because I think they used to make you buy the premium edition to use video beyond 2 people. So now you can use video with multiple people with the standard edition. Google Hangouts is not a bad one. We haven't used it a lot, but we used it a little bit, and it seems to be pretty good for doing that. That effect that you mentioned of having 5 heads all talking. And in addition, we're trying some different tools, really brought to us by our clients. So there's one, I think the company's out in California called Sococo. So it's kind of like you have a team room and there's some video. Maybe you've seen something. Yeah, and there's a few of these things out there. So Sococo is one we've tried. It's not bad. In the end, it's kind of like you're sharing a PowerPoint still, but you can see people's faces and you can kind of go into a team room to talk with different people. So it's kind of cool. And then there are some other tools like Slack is one you might hear of that people are trying. So we've been trying that. And Trello is another. So there seems to be some real innovation around these development collaboration tools that's happening. And there's some real venture capital money being thrown at this now. I forget if it was Trello or Slack got like a big round recently. So there's real money being invested in that. So I think we're going to see some good tools emerge from that.
And one of the things we used to do when I was with DuPont, when we were at the client sites, if we had a conference room, a few people off who weren't at the conference, an audio conference, get extra microphones and just do a sound check. Hey, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? I've got someone who's working with me. She's doing some SEO work for me. She would talk on her iPhone. I couldn't understand her. iPhones are great tools. Horrible microphone. It's a great computer. Horrible phone. So I said, Wendy, wait a second. I went on Amazon. I bought a headset and had it mailed to her. Showed up the next day just because I got so sick of not being able to hear. So the moral of the story is microphones, do a mic check. Make sure everybody can hear.
But if I could also touch on that, from a business development standpoint, know when the ROI is there to be in person, and when not. And somebody mentioned some of our colossal failures were from several years ago. Well, here's a success that happened on Thursday of last week. Company in Seattle said, well, we could just do a video conference, and the video conferences I know already they never work, or not when you're trying to close something. I said, tell you what, I'll have my team in DC and I'll just come out to Seattle. And so the ROI, the cost was relatively inexpensive. One hotel night, Southwest. Yeah, it was less than $1,000 for me to go out there all in. And I was able to serve as the orchestrator. I know my team. I know what they're talking about. I was able to serve as color commentary. I was able to see the facial expressions of the customers in the room. And so, yes, we had 3 people in Seattle and a team of 3 in DC. But because I was able to be there, I was able to orchestrate it a little bit. So it was very low cost, huge value, and it made this video conference call work brilliantly. So that's a real nice best practice. Have that one person, one member of the team there that knows the team, can coordinate it. And I think that would work from the softer side of business development and also the very technical side of product development and software development.
I think it was Woody Allen who said 80% of success is just showing up. Is that right? Okay, I think we got time for a couple more questions. We're getting close to the here. Bill, go ahead.
Whenever I see a Bruce Lee movie, the Chinese and the Japanese, it's clear they just hate each other. So, do you ever have teams where, I've been on a project where there were people in Poland and people in India, and cultures you think probably don't have that much contact with each other. But how do you really, it's not just you and the other people, it's what all the other people on this team when you're getting more than just 2 countries involved. How do you see that they're actually connecting with each other as well?
I think you just saw this issue, right?
Oh, yeah, it hasn't been that bad for us, but it sounds like it might. Our office, actually, our first office in Ukraine happened to be in a place called Donetsk, which probably none of you had ever heard of until recently, when it turned out to be the worst place in the world to run a development center. So, so what we did was we offered our people, basically we stuck it out until the shooting started, and then we said, all right, we need to get the hell out of here. So we offered our folks to basically get out, and we said, we're going to set up an office in another city called Dnipropetrovsk, and we're going to rent a couple apartments, a few apartments. Basically, you're gonna have to, shack up 3 to an apartment. We're not gonna give you your own apartment, but we'll give you a bed. And we rented a bunch of apartments, and a bunch of people moved. But some people wanted to move to Russia because they decided, I really, I don't want to be in Ukraine anymore. I want to be in Russia. So some of them moved to Russia. And, it kind of was along, not purely, but somewhat along political lines. Obviously you moved to Russia because you want to be there, and the people who wanted to stay in Ukraine wanted to be there. But they're continuing to work together, and it's okay. So I don't quite know why that is. I think we've just kind of kept the politics, out of the office, and just, said, look, we don't talk politics in the office, we talk work. And it's been okay. But yeah, I was a little nervous about it, obviously, with that going on, and people really, deciding what side of a war literally they were on. But it's, I don't know, it's no magic best practice. I think just keeping the business talk about business.
I think there are times too, depending on what the geopolitical things aside, if you're using an outsourcing partner versus you have your internal teams that are, located around the globe, sometimes it's just a matter of coming down to leadership management and it's like, how you would treat your kids of like, no, now it's time to get it done because we're wasting money. There's a lot of bickering. There's a lot of misunderstandings type of thing. Sometimes it's a matter of we've got to get this thing back on track, and so here's how it's going to go. Right? So there's a time to play nice, and there's a time when you really need to set the direction and say, everybody needs to get on this path, and if you're not on the path, then we're going to find somebody who is. Tough love.
Your comment before, know why you're doing this. Why are we bringing together, why do we have a development team in Poland, India, US, and Chile for that? Know why. There may be very good reasons. And if there are very good reasons, then again, those reasons should be communicated to the team. There are very good reasons why we have this group in particular country versus, and I think that very clear communication. And then I don't know, how you treat your kids or, kind of party rules. Well, we don't talk religion, politics, religion and politics in the office. We just don't talk about that right now. And we understand it's important to everybody, and we're going to have that opportunity. And the other thing, growing up in a consulting firm that I learned, and I think it's a really great practice, and also being involved in heavy manufacturing, twice a year in heavy manufacturing, DuPont, and then I also, my very early part of my career was General Motors. Twice a year, they shut the factory down. They shut it down, right? Once around December, and then once in the summer. They shut the whole plant down, and what do? They oil the machines, they change the cutting blades, they do all this interesting stuff, right? Well, your teams need the same maintenance, right? There has to be that once a year for a weekend. We're going to bring everyone in. Gordon, you remember the glass manufacturer in Tennessee? When we were together at DuPont, I talked about it a lot. There's a glass manufacturer There's a glass manufacturer in Tennessee. It's a fantastic story, and I'll finish my comments here because I know we're almost out of time. If you've ever been to a place that manufactures glass, the sheet, it's an incredible process. I mean, these plants are 1.5 miles, 2 miles long, for a reason. On the one side of the plant, on the far right-hand side of the plant, they have the raw materials, the sand, the silica. It all comes together and it comes across these flames, and then it's this molten, 2-foot deep molten pile of glass. And then 2 miles later, continuous. It's a sheet of glass. And then they have all these cutters that come across that appear to cut across on a diagonal, but because the glass is moving at such a speed, they actually cut it perfectly straight. None of that's important. What's really important is this process never, ever stops. 365 days a year, they are making glass. And so when they need to do maintenance, they just break the glass. The glass just kind of goes into a vat and gets recycled back. To make a point, the plant manager, this plant was having some performance issues and horrible performance issues where people were career-ending injuries and process things. He held a meeting in the factory floor where he let the glass, they call it recycling the glass, where he let this entire sheet of glass for the 20-minute duration of his meeting recycle. And so I want you to imagine this meeting. The entire plant is there, and behind them is just the sound of this breaking glass the whole time. So my point is, on these international teams, sometimes you just, and you're having that tough time, you're not having the relationships working, the team's not getting the job done. Sometimes you just need to break the glass and bring everyone together and say, guys, we just dumped 15 grand flying you all in here. We're going to solve this problem, or we're going to make a change, right? And so, sometimes you just got to break the glass, and sometimes you have to make that visual thing to your organization. You're going to bring the Poles, the Indians, the Chileans all in to some location. Make it a neutral location. Don't bring them to Jersey. Bring them someplace else. I grew up in Jersey. I can say that. But bring them someplace and make that point to your team that what really matters, and that and again, open communication.
Okay, so we are just about out of time.
You got a few more minutes if there are more questions.
I just want to add some comments on that. Just kind of going through. That was a wonderful story, by the way. I'm going to remember that and try and reuse that if you don't mind.
No problem. It's not copyright.
The thing with outsourcing and offshoring that you need to remember as a client is that you might outsource your grunt work, but you're still holding the keys as far as your people management is concerned. So just in the same way, if you had people full-time working for you in your team, and they might work out of New Jersey or New York or Boston or wherever else in the country, if they're spread out over the world, you still hold the personal responsibility. So you might, if you can, fly down every few months or a year or so and meet with them, great. But there are things you can do. For example, just ask for a team picture from each of the teams, circulate that around, show everyone a picture of everyone else. When you actually can see the person you're talking to or you have been talking to, you actually feel a person, you will feel a personal connection. It's one thing to just keep talking over the phone with someone, and then when you finally meet that person or see a picture of that person. For example, on LinkedIn, there's this always, if you go LinkedIn one-on-one, they say always have a picture on your LinkedIn profile. Why do they say that? Because once someone sees your picture, they actually see you very differently. They may form a personal bond with you. So share pictures. Doing video conferencing is so easy. GoToMeeting for up to 5 users, it's just about some $25 per user. Nothing compared to how much you'll spend even on a lunch out with a few clients. Mm-hmm. Get everyone together on a GoToMeeting, share the desktops, put the video on, see each other's face. Once in a while, do that. Once in a while, get your boss or your boss's boss to do a virtual town hall. Get your teams from all across the globe together in their own conference rooms. Get your senior person to talk to them and let him tell all of them how important all of them are. So the same things you do for your team, do for your outsourcing team. Let them know that they're a part of your team, because when they're coming out, think of it this way. The outsourcing firm is only charging you for a body of work. They assume that, okay, the guy's going to come in, work 40 hours a week, and they're charging 40 hours a week. The fellows on the ground aren't working 40 hours a week. They may be working 50 hours a week, 60 hours a week, just to make your project happen. Sign the contract, then put it in the drawer, and then work with the people on the ground. Make them feel nice about it, and they'll do the work for you.
So on global meetings, one of the things, and we're never going to get away from this, but when we were dealing with India and Europe and America on a project team, you only had those 2 hours of sweet spot from like 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. and you can have a team meeting. We're never going to get away from that. My question is more like almost from the beginning, is when you're doing the outsourcing or the offshoring decision, how do you choose your partner overseas? And the reason I'm bringing this up because the firm I'm in now is dealing with an issue where they selected a vendor, they liked the product, they said, okay, we're going to sign on, and then they found out that the bench overseas was a lot thinner than they thought. And so that the person who's running the show for them over there is practically was hired when they landed the contract, that type of thing. So how can you avoid that kind of pitfall? And how have you selected your partners in the past?
You guys answer this one.
I think what you're observing is pretty common in the industry. look, we're talking about human beings. There's variability in people. In any IT product I bought, you feel that involved a service element. You bought it from the person who really knew what they're doing, but the person who delivered may or may not know what they're doing. It's common. So I don't have any real pearls other than what people do for us. They check our references. I think the sectors we succeed in are really a few where we have some proven track record. We opportunistically sell in other areas, if something walks in the door. But when I go back to it, what are we good at? We're good at logistics and supply chain, enterprise software. We're pretty good with startups who are involved in enterprise software, because that's kind of the world I came from. B2B software. We do have a little bit of gaming business, but that's one that is a bit of an accident. It's not my background, but my partner, I think, knows a little more about that. But in those sectors we're good. So I think my advice would be to look for a firm that has some track record in the sector you're in and some real domain expertise.
I think, if you're sitting in front of a salesperson from a firm like that, you have to assume that the certain amount of what they're saying is BS, right? I mean, it's a good salesperson, right? So they're sitting there.
Do we have any salespeople here?
We can do it all. I am, so I know.
I'm married to a salesperson.
And so, we can do it all, and we have this great track record. I'm not sure that whether or not that person is new is relevant, right? Because they may bring with them a world of experience for that particular type of project. So it doesn't matter if they have a tenure with the company that you're looking to bring in. They could bring the experience to actually get this thing delivered. The other piece that we used to do in another company that I worked in was we would ask to speak to the project manager they had in mind. We'd do a tech screen for their tech leads, those types of things to make sure that they really did have the depth.
Right.
Whether or not they have the bench depth, what happens if 2 people call out sick? Are we going to be short? Not my problem. I hired you to do a job, and so you have to have the contingencies in place in order to make that happen. And so, there's a certain amount of due diligence that we did as a customer, and there's a certain amount of due diligence that I did as an outsource person selling these services, to make sure that the clients had a relative level of comfort, right? And so then, ultimately, whether or not a C# or a COBOL or whatever developer isn't there that day it's not my problem. We've contracted for this project. It is your job as my project manager to figure this out and to make sure that we don't slip. And if you do slip, you need to make sure that it's accurately reflected in reporting, the meetings and everything, so I can make sure that we report it internally as well. So there's a certain amount of responsibility that I have as the customer, but then there's also a certain amount of responsibility that I'm giving back to the firm that I'm outsourcing to say, this is your problem to solve.
The only thing I can add to that is what I do currently with my customers, because I believe in what we do, and I know we're at a world-class level. I'm able to say to my customers, in the first year contract, we're going to give you 90, 180 day outs, right? Free and clear. If after 90 days we're not delivering what we said we could deliver, you just walk away. No questions asked. We'll rip the contract out. Having the confidence to be able to say that separates some of the wheat from the chaff. Now, that could just be, people may be asking, a lot of salespeople will say, well, if I get you into a 90-day contract, I know I can sell you on a 180-day contract. But there is some value in a firm that's willing to say, you can walk away after 90 days free and clear. And that's what we do today. We're pretty confident in what we do.
Yeah, I think we have time for one more. Sure.
Yeah, it's not so much just a comment about the whole thing about how do you pick your vendor and the kind of offshore versus on outsourcing. 2 experiences that I had, both at a very large bank, were quite different. And I think there's also, in addition to which vendor, and is one vendor better than another, I think there's a certain expectation you have to set, either for yourself or for the recipient of the service, because on one project where we outsource the support team, it was still a team that we were going to be involved in. And it wasn't development, but it was enhancements and support and things that were very much integrated with the rest of the team. And so there was an expectation, a higher level expectation of how well they were going to work in the level of service. In another project I worked on, we were offshoring, we were basically setting up managed service that was bare bones, cheap, cheap, cheap. And the name of the game was how cheap could this managed service support a large number of applications. And the problem was, or not the problem, but expectations had to be adjusted so that, okay, you're only paying, let's say, $100 a year to support this application, but it's going to be bare bones as opposed to what you had in-house, where it cost $10,000 a year for the application and you had much better support. And there's that expectation setting, because otherwise right off the bat, it just seems, oh, the vendor just doesn't do a good job. But at the end of the day, those who signed the contract had to understand you couldn't possibly have the same level of service.
Yeah, you probably got your $100 worth, right?
You get what you pay for, right?
You get what you pay for. And in the particular organization I was working on this project, that's what the organization wanted. It was all about bottom line, still provide a service, but just set the expectation with the kind of application clients that it's not going to be the same service that they had, because the bottom line of the organization was to save money. So I think that's an aspect as well. It may not be like for like once you move to a vendor.
All right.
Thank you very much to Joe and Andrew and Mike and Gordon.